Okay, so let's talk about the project that you're going to be doing in positive and negative space. Since this is going to be a major project, you really want to understand what we're supposed to do. So, and I apologize, our images are not perfect on some of these. My iPad just doesn't transfer over good images for some reason. This is a major project. It's going to be our final negative drawing application. And what you're going to do is you're going to create one drawing which shows active understanding of negative space drawing and adheres to the guidelines that are specified in this video. First, you're going to hang a solid colored cloth. I prefer a contrasting color to the green of the plants, like pink or red. I find more students do well with that. Anyway, you're going to put that where behind where you intend to set up your still life, or use your still life box and drape the material over that. And if you don't have cloth, you can look for any kind of solid colored sheets or tablecloths or robes, t-shirts, but I found that a color that's not green usually works best for everybody. Your subject matter in still life is going to be of at least 3 distinctly different plants. Now you could use more, but we're looking for distinctly different plants. You want to choose plants that are not fake or plastic or paper or silk, because they are usually stamped out and they are positioned in a way that they look fake, and you want it to look as though you didn't draw it poorly. You want to actually show the detail of a leaf turning in space. So you want to make sure that they're real plants. Now if you don't have plants, you can go pull some weeds, or you can cut some foliage from a tree, preferably a sumac or elm, because they're just jerks. Anyway, you can put it in a water vase so it stays alive, and you want to make sure that they're easily identifiable from each other. You don't want to do a bunch of the same plants. You want distinctly different. So if you look, these plants over here are technically different, but they're very similar in the types of plants that they are. They all have broad and narrow leaves, broad to thin, narrowing leaves, whereas these 3 are distinctly different from one another. They don't look like they're from the same family. You want to select varied leaf shapes, some that are broad, some that are rounded, fat, thin, narrow. Don't select plants that have so much detail that you're not willing to put in the amount of time that it takes to draw it. So for instance, cactus. Each single spike is at a different angle and it has a tendency to be hard to observe. Most people end up symbolizing the drawing, and you don't want to do that. So symbolizing, what is that, you ask? In a nutshell, it's faking it. It's making something up rather than really observing it or stylizing it or something like that. So here you can see they didn't want to have to draw every single one of these, so they just started kind of going like this to get the general shapes of these flowers or whatever on there. Plus they have 3 of the same kind of flowers here. I'm like, don't do the same thing. You want different ones. So this is extremely symbolized. You can tell they're not really drawn from observation, that they just look fake. You want to be sure to position plants so that they overlap one another and create easy to see negative and positive space. So here I've taken some plants, they're all overlapping each other, and if you look at this one, this is a really good area for overlapping plants to show negative space position. In this one, you can see it's so dense, there's not a lot of negative space in here, so none of that will be very readable. So this is a bad area to draw for your overlapped plants to show negative space and shape. You really want it to be in a position where it helps you to be successful at making a good drawing. And remember, no one gets to see your still life except for you. You're the person that gets to see it. Everybody else, they'll never know what you were drawing. So if you don't get it to where everything is readable, they'll just think you're a bad drawer. You want to be sure that when you're placing your plants that you position them for maximum readability. can you tell what's happening in these images? They're very confusing. So they're confusing their positive and negative space, and their readability is very compromised. So what is this? I have no idea what else in here. It doesn't look right. It doesn't look believable, and I don't know what's going on. Somehow we got a floating thing in space here. This is not negative. That's actually a positive. So they're getting very confused with what's positive and what's negative there. Here you have, now these aren't even plants, but you can see that these have too much overlapping of the objects. The objects no longer create negative space. The readability is compromised. Composition is weak and uninteresting. They simply just don't have enough negative space. So you need to actually show that you understand what I'm looking for when I say negative space. Now you can use other things which can help to create negative space as long as they're also helping to create negative space. So things like ladders, chairs, stools, cords, hoses, and string to hold up any drooping vines. All of that kind of stuff makes better negative space. So I could put some plants on some of these steps or in here, or run them through the chair and loop them around, and that would give me some more negative space and more readability possibly. Here's a poor choice of additional materials to help create negative space. This is beautiful, this part right here, but this is just a big area of flat nothing. So most of the plant, we can't even read the plants that are in here anymore. They're just gone. They're just not there. So you want to make sure that you pick things that are going to help you to be successful. So another thing that you need to consider is you can use pots, but you need to be careful. I don't want any weird pots, because sometimes when you're looking at it, you can't tell what it is really. And with this, if we only saw this shape, as a negative space out here, we wouldn't really know what this weird thing is. We're just not going to get it. So think about if you are going to have anything, you need to always position it for readability, but I'd stay away from weird pots of any kind. What I suggest is if you do have a pot that's creating negative space like this, then position it so that it actually shows that negative space and you can read the profile more successfully. So this actually might be readable with this negative space of the legs and the belly underneath. You might be able to understand it's a hippo with a flower pot in its back. But you always want to position things in profile for readability. It kind of helps, but I still kind of suggest not drawing the pots. You just don't really need to. If you are going to draw your pots, though, then you don't want to accidentally tilt them just a slight bit so they feel askew. You want them to be very straight across here, and you want them to be very symmetrical, and you want to show the negative space that you have there. So make sure that you have them at eye level. You don't want any tilted axes that are just slightly off, because people just think you didn't get your axis line right. Try not to look down into the pot or have the pot so above you that you're looking up at the pot. If you're going to have pots, it kind of distorts your readability. Try to get it at a profile right on your eye level if at all possible. Avoid paper and bows wrapped around your pot. This makes readability really difficult, so keep that out. You don't have to draw the pots for this project. Those are optional, so you really don't even need them. So you want to gather all your materials before you begin: your drawing board, the white foam core board that's in your kit, your still life box if you're going to draw with that and put your images in that, 18 by 24 white drawing piece of paper that's in your pad. I also suggest putting newsprint underneath it, especially when you start to marker in. You want your ruler for measuring a border if you want, because you have the option. And I always use also my center finding ruler in case my pot's axis lines are off, or in case I need to check the symmetry of my pot. You want your pencil, eraser, a big fat Sharpie marker, the other markers for your kit for detail, and a solid cloth of some sort, and the required plants to be drawn. In your studio space, you're going to basically set up as normal. You're going to clean it from debris. You want a solid wall in the background, or your still life box, a comfortable chair scooted away from the table, and you should have your drawing board tilted. Position the objects, of course, to be drawn about 3 foot away or so in front of a blank wall or the box. And you don't really need to light this still life because you're looking at negative space. You should be spending somewhere around 4 to 6 hours, but sometimes it takes longer and sometimes it takes less time. Our normal traditional time in studio course in just 1 week of class 2 times a week is 3 hours each time we meet, so it's 6 hours of class time. And you're expected to pretty much put that in outside in any studio course that you take. Specifics, your goal is to first create a still life which is easily readable and obvious negative space. You want to prove to your audience that you know what negative space is based on the still life you set up, and you must use the specified plants we talked about already. For example, this is what we normally draw in the 3-hour class before we do the plant project that you're doing. You can easily see that I set up a still life with a ton of these negative spaces in it so that people really have to practice the negative space in here. They're all drawing these pink shapes and the white shapes that are through here and aligning them with one another. Everybody always thinks that they can't do it, but then they do it. And they're like amazed. Your compositional requirements, once you set up your still life, you want to check it for readability, take out your viewfinder and look through one eye and crop out an open composition. An open composition is where information in your composition runs off of your picture plane. So what we have right now, as he's looking through his window, is first of all, he only has one plant. But then second of all, he is in fact not really making an open composition. In an open composition, you want things to run off of all of the edges of your compositional window. So if we look at this is much more an open composition because it's running off all 4 sides of your composition, where this is an enclosed composition or a closed composition. You want to be sure you have all 3 plants in your composition. So you can't see the 3 plants in this one. You can see the 3 plants here. So one of the things that you need to think about, though, is also crossing these over to get a little bit more readability of negative space. So while you're looking through your viewfinder, you want to look at the negative space in your viewfinder and see if there's a noticeable negative space shape that aligns on the edge of your viewfinder, or if you have one that looks like a window, on something that aligns on the actual crossing of the string that you might have on there, or anyway, you want to think of that as being your piece of paper, and so when you start to look at that, it really helps you to figure out where you want to start that negative space on your piece of paper and about how large it should be. So if I'm looking at this through my viewfinder, I want to see where this is right here in relationship to where my piece of paper that looks like this is. If I know it's about, 3/4 of the way on this line, that'll help me to start to put that in more successfully. If you want to create a border on your drawing or paper, you can do so. I suggest a 1 inch or a 1.5 inch or a 2 inch, but no larger than that, because then you get into, taking away a lot of your compositional field. If you choose to have pots in your composition, be sure there are no tilted axis lines and that they are, in fact, symmetrical pots. This pot looks like this is a very curved and rounded edge, but I don't know what happened here. That's crazy. And then this is really weird. This doesn't even look like it's going to align with each other. It's all wonky, and I don't know what's happening there, and there's not even a plant in there. Okay, so to start your drawing, you want to start by determining where you're going to put your negative space, and you're going to start your drawing with one negative space shape at a time. You're going to align and draw the next negative space in relationship to the first one. So if this is your first negative space, you're going to leave the positive space, and then you're going to draw the next negative space. Leave the positive. Next negative space, leave the positive, next negative space, leave the positive, and so on until the whole drawing just starts to build itself. You always have to draw them in relationship to each other, and you want to keep going over and over and over, leaving the space for the positive shape between. Eventually you're going to see a silhouette shape of the positive plants when you finish. So here you can see that they started drawing all positively in here. You're not going to see this in negative space. You just see this shape or this shape, but you're not going to see this line or any of this stuff that's in here. So don't do this. That's positive shape drawing. You're doing negative space drawing and aligning those shapes together. So this is good, this is bad. When you finish drawing in with pencil, you want to check all your alignments. You want to make sure that this edge aligns all the way down. Do you see how it just broke right there? And even this one's not really aligned right here. Do you see it? And then this is curving down in like this, but it should just be straight across to come to this line. So there's a lot of wonkiness here, and you want to avoid that if at all possible. You'll then be looking, color in your negative space shapes with black marker, leaving the positive silhouette shapes white. And you want to do it with craftsmanship. This is really important. Look how clean this blackening in is over here, although this is a closed composition. So it's not fulfilling the compositional rule, but it's still a beautiful drawing that they did a great job blackening in back here. This one, he's got like 8 different colors of markers in here, and he also has a spider web. What is that? Don't do that. You want it to be clean and smooth. It may take 1 or 2 times to do it. I also want you to notice where he's placed this bottle, right on the edge of this pot. So now it looks like it's a part of this pot's edge, so it looks wonky and weird, and the readability is awkward. You also want to use big markers for large shapes and sections, and small markers for these tinier ones that are in here. This one does have incredibly beautiful detail though. Okay, marker in as neatly as possible. You want to consider craftsmanship. Like I said, you may have to cover that more than one time. Make sure that you have some paper underneath as padding, because often your markers will bleed through to the ground below. You don't want to have that happen. Here's another spider web maker in here. Do you see all these weird circles? When this is completely dry and your marker no longer smells on your drawing, then if you have any pencil lines, you can go ahead and erase those. I just want to mention though, if you find that before you're starting to marker in that your pencil lines are way too dark and you can't erase them away, and you want to just put it up in a window in your house, I like to tape it into the window in the house, and then put a new sheet of paper and use the light coming through the window in your house to just go ahead and retrace it, and that way you don't have to redraw the whole thing. We call that the light table. So you want to avoid the following problems. Do not symbolize when you draw. Try to get all the detail you can and can observe. You want to pay attention to how a leaf turns in space. So you can see how this looks much more believable, whereas this is kind of just marked around to make it look like it's, doing what it's supposed to do. Can you tell what's symbolized in this composition? If you guessed that it is in fact this butterfly, you would be right. That's just a made-up thing. And then in addition, they're having some trouble aligning their shapes. Where did this giant shape come from? It's not aligned with any of these others. So they're having a little bit of trouble with that readability. Try not to create any weird tension areas, like where this edge is actually touching, where the tips of the ears are touching. These are okay because they're actually running off and look intentional. So you want to try and keep your images on. Another thing to avoid is not to put enough detail. Like this isn't even plants, these are chairs, but you'll notice that they don't really have any kind of they have very little detail, so it's really hard to read what this is supposed to be about. Be careful about accidentally lining in your positive shape space. First of all, I have no idea what this is, and nobody else knows either. But avoid marking any of these lines in, because that's positive drawing. And remember, you're only drawing these shapes from here to here, leaving the positive between. So you'll never see any of these lines crossing over. Position everything that you have for maximum readability, which means mostly profile. Alignment issues. Here's another one that's having alignment issues. Where things come together where you have an X, you really have to work at getting this edge and this edge to align as one, drawing this negative space and this negative space together. Do you see how none of that's going together? It's all wonky and weird. You always want to make sure you also avoid any kind of wiggly markers, and that only has one plant. So there's actually 3 plants here. The blackening in needs a little bit of work, but the problem that they're having here is they position this plant directly behind this plant, and so you can't tell that that's a 3rd plant. And there's no reason for these pieces here not to be held up with string or something to cross over, so we're really not seeing much overlapping. So be careful in your positionings of your pots, because sometimes it just makes things look like they're poorly drawn. Axis lines and symmetry of pots. You need to pay attention to any kind of tilted axes. Do you see how this edge is not symmetrical to this edge, so it seems really weird, and it's slightly leaning over just a little bit like this one. So, and no overlapping of your plants again. No overlapping of the plants. This is not an open composition, and there's barely any negative space interaction in here, so it's a really bad example of negative space drawing. Okay, there's not a single thing in here that's right. First of all, they used a teeny tiny marker to blacken in all of this enormous area. This must have taken hours and hours of time. Just draw this bigger and make it better to begin with. So you don't have all this. But craftsmanship here, we can't read these, no overlapping, no negative space. It's not an open composition. I mean, it's just, don't do this. Okay, so here's some examples of past students. Some of them are better than others, and you can just look and see which ones you think are right and wrong. There you go. All right, good luck. I hope you do an excellent job.